Hello and welcome to the Tifo Football Podcast. I'm Joe Devine, and I'm delighted to be joined today by JJ Bull, the Bullard. Hi, JJ.
Yes.
Did you have a lovely Christmas and New Year?
No.
No, okay. Well, here also joining us is Jonathan Dog Mackenzie. Hi, John.
Hello.
And how was your festive season?
It was wonderful.
Wonderful indeed. Of course, mine was too. Thanks for asking. Now, no Seb Stafford-Bloor today. He's still recovering from 6 years of working at Tifo. He's got 2 weeks off. And he'll be back next week, I think, to join us. Very exciting. But lots going on in the podcast today for us to discuss. Where else to start? But with Southampton circling the relegation drain there. Very exciting. Manchester United, bit of a resurgence for them. 100% victory since the restart. So we'll talk about that today. Chelsea, yes, in 10th place, facing the reality of being a normal club. Very confusing, yes. And of course, I'm just delaying time for Steve Hankey to write out slowly what's happening during the episode. And I can see that City and Haaland, some different opinions about whether he should be in the team or not. No one says that. I don't know. That's not what we talk about. But we talk about Man City and Erling Haaland and other things as well. I don't even care. It doesn't even matter. If you're listening to this podcast, then, you probably, or have already listened to it before. Only a small percentage of people listening will be listening for the first time. And if that's you and you're new, off. And you know what? That wouldn't have had to have happened, Steve Hankey, if you were a better producer. But anyway, I will leave you. No, that's not what I do.
If you want to retain new people to watch your podcast with excellent football information, you can get a lot of it by reading The Athletic.
Keep going.
If you go to theathletic.com/Tifo right now, whoa, baby. You can read all sorts of things. Like today, I read David Ornstein's bit.
Let's see what's at the top
it had
of my
all things
feed.
in it.
Well, we've just announced.
Oh,
that
David
we
Ornstein's Monday column. Fantastic.
We just announced that we are covering Spanish football to a more greater degree.
That's right. The Athletic has hired some incredible writers to cover Barcelona and Real Madrid.
Mario Cortajana.
Yeah, Mario Cortajana.
Guillermo Rai.
Yeah.
Leia Cerveo Herrero.
Yeah, Herrera. There we go. Perfect. That's some fantastic, and also Paul Byers, who was covering Manchester region for us before. But there's a bunch of amazing pieces. If you're already an Athletic subscriber, I should say, and you follow one of the Premier League teams, you can now expect that kind of depth of coverage for Barcelona and Real Madrid too, which is very, very exciting. And here's a fun thing that's top of my list: Manchester City, the chameleon team who are always one step ahead. We talk about that in today's episode. There we go. Okay, delightful. And of course, Dermot Corrigan, I should say, as well, who's been a long time La Liga correspondent for The Athletic, still around, doing his great stuff. Thank you, Dermot, for all of your service. But I will leave you now in the warm hands and the cool embrace of España. Well, I'm delighted to say that we're joined first by Jacob Tanswell, with an N. I've been calling him Jacob Tanswell for months now. Very embarrassing for me. But Jacob, thanks for joining us. Hope you're well.
I'm all good, thank you.
Yeah, it's good. All good, unlike Southampton, who we're going to start the show by discussing. Southampton, terrible team, having a terrible time. Isn't that fair to say, isn't it? There's a few things we want to talk about today, but can you start me off by telling me why their loss to Nottingham Forest was sort of so dispiriting?
Do you know what? I was going to write that it was worse than the 2-9-0s, especially the first one against Leicester. I just thought maybe that's recency bias, maybe it's just my emotions. And a week on, I can safely say it was worse than the 9-0s because Southampton were just an absolute mess. They were booed at the end, but what was so disappointing was just how tactically shambolic they were. Nottingham Forest was sitting deep towards the end, and Southampton's 3 centre-backs just kept pumping it forward. I think there were 75 long balls, according to Opta, which is just staggering. And Nathan Jones only changed shape twice, which by his levels and by his standards, that's not many, because against Brighton, he changed shape 5 times. So, he didn't do much to change that, and the whole general performance was littered by mistakes and just, grave errors, and that just spoke of a team that's probably going to get relegated as well.
Wow, okay. Well, that's a pretty damning indictment. Also, long ball's not necessarily something you would associate with a Southampton team, but we'll come back and talk about Nathan Jones a little bit later. Sport Republic, though, who are the owners of Southampton, took over about a year ago. What is their long-term plan, and does it include relegation?
I don't think it includes relegation, no. Right. They carried out a significant overhaul in players in the summer because they thought they could improve and build on it. And you've got to remember, this time last year, Southampton had just beaten Brentford, Rasmus Ankersen's old team, and they were trying to get into the top 10. So this wasn't in the plan. And since then, they've overhauled the existing squad. They've got a lot off the old guard, off the wage bill. Jack Stevens is on loan, Nathan Redmond's gone. They've brought in these players, and these 10 players who look quite good. Romeo Lavia, Armel Bella-Kotchap, Gavin Bazunu, who's only young. But they haven't been supplemented by the experience. And the experienced players they have got aren't performing. I think if you look at James Ward-Prowse, poor old Ward-Prowse, he's just there trying to do everything. And the burden on him is more than probably any other player in a middle into lower Premier League club at the moment.
Yeah, okay. Rasmus Ankersen, John, remind us who he is, because I remember we made a video about this when the takeover happened about a year ago. Some people were quite excited about it, took conversations about data, for example. Why was that?
Yeah, Rasmus Ankersen is a Danish chap who played football for Midtjylland, I think, who are one of the big teams that everyone talks about in terms of the teams that have gone through the data revolution. Ended up at Brentford. I think he became the director of football or someone high up at Midtjylland and came to Brentford to be one of the co-directors there as well, and moved on to Southampton recently. So the idea is, bring in a guy who oversaw the turnover of Brentford, made Brentford the team that they are. But I guess for me, the interesting thing is that a lot of the times when these sorts of things happen, you take a club who are maybe further down the league pyramid, you're able to implement the structures, the infrastructures that you want early on, and you're given the time then to put things in place, move things along quite slowly. Whereas this is a very different kind of project, right? It's a club that has a new ownership, it has a new structure of people who are making the decisions at the club. And they've got to this point where they've just overhauled everything in a very short space of time. I know that Rasmus Ankersen is someone who does a lot of, I don't want to say motivational speaking. He does a lot of presentations to big corporations.
Yeah.
And I was having a look at some of the things that he's done. He's written a book, and one of the chapters is if it's not broken, have a think about maybe breaking it.
Right.
Which I think maybe changed my opinion of what's going on at Southampton, because that almost looks as though that's what they've done. They've sort of taken a model and they've said, right, the problem with this model is that we've sort of stagnated. We need to change things up, and that could be the catalyst for, I guess, a more positive change.
Yeah.
And as Jacob's saying, what that's looked like is taking a club that had a very specific style of football. They brought in Ralph Hasenhüttl, who was obviously from the Red Bull stable, maybe not the most classic of Red Bull coaches, but it did seem as though they wanted to bring in that style of play, like really aggressive, intense, high pressing, so that you can almost game the system, right? You can bring in players who are going to be overlooked in the market because they have intensity rather than maybe technical ability. Bring that in, see if it works in the Premier League. And I suppose the idea is that you're sort of able to run a club fairly cheaply in the Premier League, get benefits that you might not get from the amount of money that you're spending, and see how long you can go for. And
they went for a long
yeah,
time.
It worked.
So to be fair.
Yeah, it did work. And I think now the big question is, right, once you've reached that point and you've realised that the ceiling for that is you're going to be in a relegation battle every season, but you'll probably survive. The question is, well, how do we move on to the next step where we're not in that relegation battle every season? And it felt like to me in the summer that the decision made was, well, let's try and move from this style of football to maybe a more possessional heavy style of football. And to do that, rather than bringing in players at the peak of their game who have all of these abilities, start gambling on bringing players in who are younger in academy systems, namely the Manchester City Academy.
Right.
And they kept on Hasenhüttl, obviously, but the idea, I think, was that he just changed up the way that he was playing. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but would you agree with that? The idea was bring in Hasenhüttl, see if he can play this sort of style of play, and if not, move him on, bring someone else in.
And one of the key things as well is that Hasenhüttl started the season with a back three. I think they were clearly just got completely ground down by the amount of goals they were conceding, the easy goals, because when the press wouldn't work, which is around the winter time, they were getting played through every single time. And I think Southampton in the summer, they brought in Ruben Sellers, who's an assistant coach who's quite pragmatic. He focuses a lot on structure, defensive shape, and they thought if we could go to a back three, then we'll stop conceding, we'll be harder to beat, and then we'll still sometimes press, and then we'll be a generally more consistent, more effective team. Because throughout Hasenhüttl's tenure, they would go on great runs of form, but then they would go on these horrendous runs of form, and I think they tried to cut out that inconsistency. But in cutting out that inconsistency, you've lost all the high octane press, you've lost all the entertainment and all the good parts of Southampton, really.
You talked about relegation there, which does seem sort of on the cards this season, given that Southampton are currently bottom of the table. And it doesn't seem, there's an obvious route out for them. Burnley, though, are an example of a team that have been relegated and doing rather well this season. And you sort of suggested last week in conversation, John, that maybe it's a good opportunity for a reset. Jacob, with Southampton, do you think that is a possibility, or would it be very bad? Like it's more like an Everton sort of situation if they were to be relegated.
I think it's a good point, but the only caveat to say is that the reset actually happened in the summer. They signed 10 players, they let go of 12. If they wanted the reset then, they didn't want it in the Championship. And their whole model is basically buy to eventually sell on. And they know that the only way they're going to be sustainable is through selling the likes of Romeo Lavia, through Armel Bella-Koch. And if they go down, they'll get good money, but they're not going to get anywhere near the amount they would get if they were still in the Premier League.
Okay, fine. Let's talk about Nathan Jones then. John, what do you think so far? 4 games?
Yeah, well, the impression that I'm getting from Southampton fans is that it's very hard to tell exactly what his style of play is. And I think I've heard you, Jacob, saying that whenever you've pushed him on this, he sort of talks about flexibility being his like predominant characteristic, which again, like when you're working in a team where everything's going wrong, working in a club where everything's working out for you, and you have the ability to be flexible, obviously it's a really powerful upside to have. And I mean, is this not the lesson we've learned from Graham Potter, right? He coached Brighton to a point where his team were supremely flexible in different phases of play. He's gone into Chelsea and his players don't have the ability to move between those sorts of systems as he wants them to, and it's not been working out for him. So I think this is the difficulty with these sorts of managers, is that you have to accept that when you bring them in, if there is going to be an upside, it's going to be a fairly long and painful upside, which I just don't think Southampton can afford right now. They have to get someone in who's just going to be able to immediately change things around and get them to a point where they're able to, start getting points on the board. So yeah, I think that's the problem that has arisen here. Well,
the other thing with Southampton is that if you have any team and you bring in loads of new players, what is that noise? It sounds like a bumblebee driving a train.
For listeners, we're in a new studio today, and so we're hearing all new noises. Do you know how when you move into a new house and you go to bed late at night and then the house sort of moves and you wonder how many ghosts there are? It's a bit like that.
I was thinking we should probably apply that same thinking where if something's not broken, you should break it.
Yeah.
I would do all sorts of things. That's why I burned my house down last night. Yeah. Maybe it'll be bigger when I get back home.
Right, yeah.
Anyway, speaking of burning down the house, right? So Southampton's got all new players. So Arsene Wenger always talked about 3 or 4 key players is about all you can really change, because it takes a while for them to gel, and you see that all the time. Now, if you're at the bottom end of the Premier League, and then you sign all these new players and they don't gel enough, you lose your momentum, you lose confidence. So then it's very hard to try and drive any sort of momentum and cohesion to get these high pressing teams working. I think you see it with Liverpool just now, totally devoid of confidence, so it doesn't work all of a sudden, and it's got to be cohesive and have all the chemistry, all the little bits and pieces working, like in Breaking Bad when he's making that what is he making? What was it? Not crack.
Meth,
right?
Meth, yeah.
But he makes it to 99% purity or something, whereas other people are 97, and that's fine. But what you need is 99 to make it work, because otherwise you lose 1-0 to Crystal Palace, right? Excuse me. So they've got that going on for a start. Then you put in a manager who, I don't know enough about Nathan Jones. I was about to call him Luton Jones. That's a good name for someone. Right, so Luton Jones comes in, and I don't know exactly what all his bits and pieces are, but having watched some Southampton, it looks like you talked about in your articles, about long balls, lots of long balls. It reminds me a lot of watching Aberdeen under Derek McInnes a long time ago when they were a decent team, but not really. Had players who should be able to beat teams worse than them, but aren't actually that good. Yeah. And he would always hit long balls, just straight forward and try and chase it up with the second ball. It makes it look loose all the time. And eventually you start to what's he doing? And then the players lose confidence, and then the whole thing starts to fall apart, and you look rubbish. And it looks a bit like that already after about 4 games. And the idea being, when you get the ball forward quickly, these long balls, you chase it up. Why would you mess around passing it at the back if you're not great at it? Mm-hmm. You can just get forward, chase it up. It works sometimes, and you get the energy. But then if it doesn't work for 2 games in a row when you join a club, you start going, this is rubbish.
Yeah.
Lose confidence, players don't believe in it, and then you've got the players who aren't gelled, cohesive in that brand new team squad, don't really care about it because they've only just joined, with the manager trying to figure out who they are. Jones has played, by the looks of things, about 4 or 5 different shapes in his game so far.
I think he's changed a lot more than that. I think I counted 9 in the first 3.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Just for starting lineups I'm looking at, and he's 4-2-3, 4-3-1, kind of generic. Then if you want to play so Hasenhüttl always played with that 4-4-2 or 4-2-2-2, but you play through the middle, then your width comes from fullbacks, then that leaves you exposed at the back if he gets turned over. So then the defensive midfielders weren't really covering those wide spaces either. So you change to back three, you get better coverage at the back, and you've got your width coming from wing backs, but that's all your width comes from the wing backs rather than the forward players. So then they've got this mismatched sort of squad of players that I don't think Southampton are very good players, really. So you expect them to be at the bottom end of the team of the league. And it's basically burn it down.
Yeah, I saw you nodding a lot, not specifically at the burn it down bit there, Jacob, but I saw you nodding as JJ was talking. Do you agree with him?
Yeah, I do. And what's so staggering to me is that Sport Republic, Rasmus, talks about alignment. Alignment, like most Premier League clubs, is the buzzword at the moment. And I went to see the B team on Friday, and they were still playing 4-2-2-2, the same as Ralph.
Because that's a team of bees.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And the two number 10s into the red zone. Even the coach was shouting everything that Ralph would be, and they're going to try and make the step up into Jones's, who ultimately he wants to play a 3-5-2. He wants 5 centre backs in by the end of this window, and he doesn't want to play out from the back because Southampton centre backs aren't, apart from Saleta Sarr, aren't very good at breaking the lines with their passes. They want to play long. The issue is, when you do play long, you've got Shea Adams up top, who's quite good for his height, considering he's 5'9", winning those balls, but they haven't got the energy in behind him now. Stuart Armstrong, Mohamed Ali Yunusi's been there for a long, long time. They're getting on a little bit, and I don't feel they've still got the same vigour they used to have. The two number 10s that time, they were quite new, quite enterprising. They would, especially the top 6 teams, they would trouble them because they would have a lot of energy, they would press, they would counter press really well, but it just feels like everything's off, just a little bit off at the moment. That happened probably towards the end of Hasenhüttl's reign, but it's happening now. I think the press is just a little bit off, and so when they do try and press, sporadically now, it's not quite working.
That sort of counter press idea, I think that it's very hard to make that work at Premier League level unless you have amazing players.
Yeah.
Like watching back City versus Chelsea from, was it the FA Cup yesterday? Wasn't it? We're filming this on Monday, just so you know. Like watching that back. City's press was really funny because Chelsea could hardly get out. It was so aggressive, so high up the pitch, and so well coordinated with amazing players who both understand what they've been coached to do. They also know exactly where to go and what makes sense because great footballers have that innate thing. But Chelsea were able to get out of it a couple of times because they have amazing players who are able to pass their way with short bits and pieces. Now, I think Southampton don't have the players who are good enough to be able to pass their way out of a really high press. So get rid of that if you're playing against a team who presses well, and a lot of teams press really high. It's a really sensible way to create chances or win the ball back further away from your own goal.
That's like mine and John's Rocket League tactics.
Is that right?
Yeah,
well,
we're not good enough to play out from the back, so we yeet it long, and then sometimes we get on the end of it and score a goal.
Well, this is what I watch teams do this constantly in Scotland. This is what a lot of them have to do because they don't have the technical ability to play out from the back.
Yeah. But
they also don't have to play against teams who are technically good at pressing because no one seems to be able to coach that very well in Scotland. Celtic aside. Maybe Rangers for a bit. I don't think even they're that good at it. Celtic's really good at it. And you see the problems so then you just bypass that 20-30 second phase of play where you build slowly backwards around your goalkeeper till he launches it anyway. Just get it forward from the start, go forward. But at Premier League level, do you remember when Guardiola came in and they were struggling with second balls? He said that's what they focused loads of time on. Like all managers will have done that. All these coaches who are younger come through and have heard that. And then you shell the ball to Shea Adams, and then he tries to take it down, but you've got players who will have the timing ready to go. Then as soon as the ball comes towards him, snap, you go in, win the ball, and then you've got it back, and he won't be able to play with it.
It's a really good point, though. We had a conversation, John and I, with a friend of ours the other day about, it was after the Arsenal-Newcastle game. We were talking about differing responses to time wasting. And our friend loves time wasting, says it's one of the best things in the sport. I said, why? He said, because it's a great leveller. It means that teams who don't have as good players have a chance against teams that do, and you underestimate. But when you hoof it long, put the ball in the air, push people around, suddenly it does level out the playing field a little bit.
Because the ball's not on the ground, so you don't have to worry about your technical issues, and you just get big hoofers up the top. You get a couple of fridge freezers up there, get the ball in, and you just it works. Aberdeen managed to make it work for ages. I asked Erik McInnes why he does that. And I was quite nervous asking the question because I knew he'd bite back. Like when you ask managers certain questions, it was a one-on-one situation, like in a nice little room. So it's not like in a press conference where you can maybe hide in the crowd or whatever. But sitting next to him, I said, okay, I'll ask a question. Why is it? So it seems sometimes, this is a question I asked him, it said, it seems sometimes when you're watching the games back, you get quite annoyed when your players launch it from the back towards the forwards. And I don't think for a second that's what you're trying to make them do all the time. But why is it, are you annoyed when they do that, or are you trying to get them to put the ball forward? And he responds with a bit of a bite and said that people ask him all the time, we're always hitting long balls. We're not hitting long balls, we're putting the ball where the space is. And I'm like, It kind of makes sense what you're saying, but I don't want to push you on this because I'm not going to be able to leave the room happy. I just want them to like me.
I guess the
That's why I'm
difference
not a
between
journalist.
where the space is and hitting a long ball is if the ball actually goes to the space.
If the ball
At
goes to
which
space,
point,
yeah.
the manager can't be held responsible if the players can't kick it to the right place.
I just disagree with that fundamentally because I want to control the ball. I want to keep it, but I
Very
see the
controlling
limitations.
sort of character, isn't it?
Yeah, I need control of everything. Yeah.
Well, listen, before we let you go, Jacob.
From the company?
From the company, yeah.
It's harsh.
Before I inform you.
I've liked what you said here.
I thought he was good too, but listen, the decision's out of my hands. There are a couple of other teams down there or thereabouts. We've got Wolves in 19th currently on 14 points, just 2 ahead of Southampton. Everton on 15.
Everton, yeah, they're good.
West Ham on 15, Bournemouth on 16, Nottingham Forest 17. Leicester and Leeds also on 17 as well. So, you're within 5 points of 13th if you're a Southampton fan. Can you think of 3 teams out of that 6 that might be worse over the next 4 or 5 months than Southampton? Because that's where we are now, isn't it? It's a who if not them, then who?
I'll be honest, I'm struggling. I think I've seen Bournemouth a little bit in the last couple of weeks, and they seem like they're blowing up at the moment. They similarly like to Southampton, they don't really have a system or a defined style of play. And just to touch on a direct style of play, as simplistic this may have seemed, and all the tactical nuance out the window. It was in August when Southampton thought to themselves, hold on, we've got a keeper that can kick really long, and we've got Shadams who's half decent at holding it up. Why don't we just hoof it all the time? And now they won 2-1 that day, and since then they've really just used it all the time, and all the coaches were just completely taken by the Gavin Bazuni's kicking range. So that's how Southampton play, and I think similarly with Bournemouth, they haven't really got a system, so I think they're probably vulnerable.
Okay.
And Everton, of course, they can blow a gasket, can't they?
Sure. Of course, with Everton, I suppose there's always the manager situation, which may potentially change at some point between now and the end of the season. We don't know.
I think Forest will fall into that.
You think Forest?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think
Too many players at once.
the interesting thing is that Southampton are only 3 points off getting out of the relegation zone, right?
Yeah.
Which is probably why they wouldn't be too scared of just pulling the plug on Nathan Jones, right?
No.
You kind of feel as though when it comes down to probably 2 or 3 wins and you're comfortable in this division early on, is it worth taking the risk? I think.
Well,
Probably
indeed.
that's
Oh, they got to
what I think.
break Nathan Jones. It's not working. Got to break all his bones and then do that.
As people online keep reminding us all, we are not halfway through the season yet. We're only
One more.
17, 18 games played, one more until we get there. So there's still time, and a run of 2 or 3 victories, of course, can see you all the way to glory. Let's take a break now, and when we come back, Jacob Tanswell will have magically disappeared. Okay, we're back from the break now. That was a break. It was a lovely break. Had a nice time. Did you enjoy that break, John?
I enjoy all of the breaks I get to spend with you, Joe.
Well, that's very nice of you to say so. Now, listen, let's talk about Manchester United now, various different points of topic here. Because, of course, they have a 100% winning rate since the restart. Yeah, it's very impressive. And but as John, you point out, a relatively easy run of fixtures there, games you would be expecting them to win. We can talk about that now.
Yes.
Yes.
They are games they would be expected to win. But I think we talked about this with Arsenal at the beginning of the season, right? Which was, everyone was saying, well, how good are Arsenal? They've only beaten teams that you would expect them to win against. But
Yeah.
you have to think about it in terms of the aggregate, right? You would expect them to win most of these games most of the time, but to win all of them is getting towards impressive. But yeah, Man United have moved around, turned a corner. We'll go with
They've
that
moved
one.
around a corner.
They've moved around a corner. Is that a good thing?
I don't know.
They've certainly turned a corner from the beginning of the season, right, where they were losing to teams that they should have been winning against.
Yes.
And yeah, I think they're now at that level of stability where you can start saying, right, where do we find the problems to fix? Where are the profiles that we need to make this team better? And obviously in January they will do some of that stuff, but in the summer they've now under Erik Ten Hag, I think, got a solid basis from which to start improving, and that's the first hurdle for any manager at these sorts of clubs to get over, and he's done really well on that.
Absolutely, they are Ten Hagian now, I believe. And one key element of the Ten Hagian nature, do you think that's going to catch us like a Game of Thrones thing, doesn't it? Ten Hagians rode the dragons in old Valyria.
Yeah. It sounds like he could live on one of the realms.
Yes, in God of War. A God of War, one of the 9 realms of God of War.
Are they not called realms in what's it called? Lord of the Thrones, Game of Thrones.
Lord
Thrones of the Flies.
Thrones.
I
of the
even know
Flies.
these things. I'm just obviously still ill. Yeah.
Well, anyway, listen, one of my points here was that one of the things making them such a Ten Hagian team is
This has to stop, Jay.
is the purchase of Casemiro, who's been
Casemiro.
very, very impressive for them, hasn't he?
Yeah, I mean, we sort of thought he might be because he's part of one of the greatest teams of all time that won the Champions League. What is it, about 25 times?
I think 34.
34 times, yeah. So we had a bit of a suspicion he might be good. I've always really liked watching Casemiro, but what I think is interesting what he's doing at Man United is it is different to what he did at Real Madrid, which is natural because I think there's I did a video on Tifo IRL about the importance of what he does, and it's not just defending deep, making all interceptions there, but he helps fill in the gaps everywhere else higher up the pitch, which is like talking about the things we talked at Southampton and trying to stop people early on. He's really important for that because United can press well. They're getting better at it now, but then you've got Casemiro that just fills in the blanks, and Erik Ten Hag, Carl Anka told me they said that Ten Hag says he was the cement between the stones. And I think it's a really nice phrase because it kind of explains what I think he does. He's just always there in the right gaps to stop things. And often he doesn't actually touch the ball, but he affects play by being in a position that stops someone running into that position or playing a pass through that position. It makes me think that I think it's important when you play five-a-side. Like the shape's the most important thing for me when you just like constantly move position. No one's playing striker, no one's playing defender. You just constantly move all the time.
It's interesting you say that because, of course, it's a good opportunity for me to plug a video that we released over Christmas, which is a video about walking football, where we went to go and play against my uncle's walking football team, Uncle Mick and Uncle Damien, old rascals as they are, in Harlow, Essex. Interestingly, of course, there are 5-6 players in a walking football team. You said shape. The position is less important, but I remember that you did regularly shout at me for not being in the right place.
Well, the thing is, you should be multi-positional during these five-a-side games.
Yeah, but you want me to be multi-positional.
Yes, so I think everyone has to play it. Like basically, you need. How do I describe this? I think you should always play. You've got five players in the team.
Yeah.
The way
6.
The way I've learned it doing coaching
football.
badges was that you should have basically you want a diamond because the diamond squishes up and becomes different shapes. You've got one in defence, but actually it's 3.
Yeah.
But also it can be 2. It's always moving, but it relies on the players understanding how that works at the time. And I'm not saying that anyone else in our walking football team wouldn't have been clued up on that straight away or understood the intricacies of what I wanted to be able to do.
Yeah.
But it's why I like to just stand in the places that people aren't during five-a-side games.
I think he's indirecting me here.
It seems that way, doesn't it? Yeah.
Well, that's what I like doing. I like standing. Like we play five-a-side sometimes, John.
We do. It's good. Yeah, I enjoy playing. I really enjoy playing.
Have we decided? Have we agreed upon who's the better footballer between the two?
I think we're different footballers.
Different
I
footballers.
do different things. John does lots on the ball. I do a lot off it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do a lot off it as well. Also off the pitch.
Off the pitch. Yeah.
Pretty
So
fun,
this is the way the modern football's going, right? It's if you start off just assuming you have 11 players who do things.
Yeah.
You're obviously you'll get a certain amount of upside, but if you can make it so that you're adding players in attack, so you're trying to get overloads in attack, or having players who are going to add to the defence as well, you're almost tricking the system into having more players in different phases. So, for example, pressing is a really good example of that, right? One of the things we see when teams press at the moment is they try and split the pitch in half, force everyone to one side, because what you can then do is you can go player for player on players on one side and ignore players on the other.
Yeah.
So you're generating a situation where you're actually playing almost like a man-to-man system without having all the players being marked man-to-man. So it's everything in football is going that way, I think, to how do you work the system so that you get advantages in attack and defence, which make it seem like you've got more players than you actually have.
Yeah, very interesting.
And also just on Casemiro, so you got a bit.
I was going to say, I'm so sorry, just smiling.
He's giggling away over there.
Giggling away, watching the plan, watching Steve Hankey come up with such a lovely little segue for me. Passively, aggressively typing it in the plan there. He says, speaking of attacking players. That's his segue there.
That's
he wants me to.
Though, is it? That's not what I wrote.
Well, it's pretty much. It's in essence what you wrote, Steve Hankey. He says, speaking of adding players in attack, yes. Will Man United do that in this window? Let's say if you want to hear more about JJ Bull and Casemiro, you should watch that video on Tifo IRL. And of course, watch the Walking Football video too. But speaking of strikers, yeah?
Striker.
We weren't speaking of them.
No.
Links to Wout Weghorst. Wout Weghorst. Fame, of course, from the World Cup for that fantastic free kick routine, one of my favourites during the World Cup. He's been linked to Manchester United, which is a surprise to some, less of a surprise to others, I suppose. What's going on there?
Well, he's a Burnley player who's on loan at Besiktas.
Yeah.
And now Manchester United want him. There's a lot of noise that Vincent Aboubakar, is he let go from the
club
Saudi
that
team?
Ronaldo's just joined.
Has that actually happened? El Nasser?
I believe so.
So it might be that he ends up going to Besiktas, and then Weghorst comes to be a number 9, bit of an all. He's like a complete forward. He's a target man, but he can do other bits and pieces.
6'6", isn't he?
He's a big tall lad. He's good. His positioning's quite good. Off the ball positioning's quite good at getting into places to score.
Yeah.
He can hold a ball up, which is important. He can drop in. He's probably like a fridge freezer version of Tadic a little bit. He can drop in. Maybe I think John will probably know more about him than I do.
A short-term Tadic, 30 years old, 10 goals and 21 appearances in all competitions on loan at Besiktas so far this season. I mean, he seems like a sort of Ten Hagian player.
I can hear them laughing through there. They're just goading you on. I will not put up with this. But yeah, we just put out an IRL video for sensible transfers for Manchester United, and we talked about how Manchester United under Ten Hag will want a fairly classic number 9, right? We talked about 3 different things that Ten Hag will be looking for from his number 9. He's going to look for a box presence, so someone who is going to be able to get goals, is going to be able to offer something if teams are sitting in a lowish block, so you can find him and he can score in those situations as well.
He'll give you presence from a box as well.
He wants presence from inside of the box. That's number 1. Someone long walks on the beach.
That's right. Yeah, dreamy candlelit dinners.
Yeah,
and also they want a 9 who's going to pin defenses. And when we say pin defenses, it's you're, and that's why I think you should vote for me.
Like you've got your thumb hand. Yeah.
You put pins in them.
Yeah, pins in. Go on then. Yeah,
pinning defenses.
Don't
back,
allow our repeated interruptions to stop you from making the point that you were, because it sounded like a good point, and the narrative inside of my head is going, stop talking and let him make the good point.
We're done,
yeah, we're done.
Pinning defences, just I
can't wait to hear what you're going to say. I can't wait. What is it you're going to say? 3 point. What was the first one again? Let's start again.
See, we do this when we are gaming together. I do this to you, and you get really annoyed. But that's in a private situation. We're now in the full view of the public.
Box presence was the first one.
Box presence.
Number 2 was
put pins in people.
Putting pins in people. Pinning defences. So essentially making sure that you've got someone on the line of the defence, creating space in front of the defence by forcing the defence back
with pins.
Yeah. That he will also be doing that, right? So he will be able to generate space.
We should just say we don't know whether he's actually joining or not.
Yeah, sure. Eriksen and Fernandes, obviously really creative players. So if he can create space around the edge of the box by pulling the defence back, that's going to be a good thing. And the other thing is hold-up play that JJ's already mentioned.
Yeah.
Erik Ten Hag wants that. Erik Ten Hag became famous for that team which had Tadic as a false 9, but actually all the way through that Eredivisie season, he was using like Klaas-Jan Huntelaar as a more traditional 9. Other players as well. I think they had Kasper Dolberg as well. And then obviously the second iteration of that team had Sebastian Haller in, who's again another sort of Wout Weghorst type player.
West Ham legend.
So, yeah, and I think we're going to talk about Antony a little bit, but when Antony was at Ajax with Sebastian Haller, he would cut inside onto his left foot, cross the ball to the back post, and Sebastian Haller would score.
Yeah, with extra space in order to do so, presumably because Haller had pushed the backwards line further back.
Sure, he's also just a big boy. So, I think if he does join, we'll see Wout Weghorst scoring a lot of back post headers from Antony crosses.
Okay. Well, I do want to talk about Antony. Before we do that, though, there's some great throwback names that Steve has left here in the plan for us. From the current Turkish Super League goal scoring charts this season, as a side note, top goal scorer in the Turkish Super League goal scoring charts as a side note right now. And Valencia, of course, who, if he hadn't been injured during the World Cup, may indeed have continued that fine scoring run. Other names we have here, Fabio Borini. Remember Fabio Borini of Liverpool fame? Yeah.
It's like the game, isn't it?
It's Hadji Wright, the second scorer. Is he the guy who came up for the US and scored that really random goal where it bounced off his leg and went over the goalkeeper?
Don't know. I didn't read his name because I didn't know who he was. And I didn't want
if only we had a producer who could tell us if that was true or not.
Now, 5 minutes later, we'll come back and let you know when Steve's finally managed to Google that. Other names we have here, Wout Weghorst, of course, Michy Batshuayi, and Bafétimbi Gomez.
Yeah.
I like Bafétimbi Gomez. He's a fantastic player, isn't he?
Of course, a lot of problems for Manchester United back in the day, didn't he?
Very much so. Well, there we go. Wasn't that fun? Now, listen, let's talk about Antony quickly, because there appears to be a lot of dialogue, let's say, regarding discourse regarding Antony.
Ten Hagian discourse.
Well, no, anti-Ten Hagian discourse, it would appear. Okay. It seems as though Antony, very one-footed player, has earned a kind of reputation as a bit of an easy hit for people. Just to say he's rubbish because he can only play with one foot now. As a left-handed person myself, someone very aware of how
very one-handed,
very one-handed you can be.
You're actually quite ambidextrous, aren't you?
Only when I no. No, I'm not. No. Good Lord. What was I saying?
Wow. You've really broken yourself on that one.
broke myself.
Anthony's all right. He's
wasn't broken.
What I'm saying.
We were in harmony there. Did you hear that?
Oh, were we?
Yeah, that was good. Anthony scored a goal with his right foot.
He scored a goal with his right foot. Point I'm making, right, is that that most of the discourse around Anthony so far seems to be he can only play with one foot. Having said that, right, he's played something like 10 games. He scored 4 goals, or 5 now, is it? Mostly with that one foot. Mostly doing the same thing that people don't really seem to be able to stop as easily, given that
I think I know why it is why people don't like him.
But also, before I do want to hear it, but also he played for Ten Hag before. He seems to do an awful lot off the ball that isn't referenced at all in these conversations about why people don't like him. But what is it you think the issue is, JJ?
Because when he gets the ball wide, you're excited because it's a winger, and it's not because it's Man United and you think Ryan Giggs is going to run past everyone. But it's when he gets the ball wide on the wing, he can't go past people. He doesn't really have that like pure speed to do it, and he's playing against defenders who are all really good 1v1. So you just can't really dribble past. So you have to go backwards. So it looks like you've got no creativity or ideas or whatever. But there's loads of examples when Anthony, there's I'm trying to think what it was. It was when I was doing the Casemiro research. There's like a little spell of play that I think shows how well Anthony plays in that team and how he just moves into positions where he needs to be, like fill in the gaps that you're meant to in the Ten Hag system. But he receives the ball and like the half turn is back to, well, not half turn was back to goal, but knows exactly what's behind him, spins between 2 players, which then allows him to put a ball through for Fernandes and a run from out to in, which gets a chance on goal, which United wouldn't be able to do with the players they previously had there. And what they started doing as well is getting Bruno Fernandes, I'm going to try to say his name properly, where he goes out wide to the right. So you get 2 different angles of crossing. You've got the 2 different curves. Easier to describe this as you're watching it on the podcast version on YouTube.
You've just drawn curves with your fingers.
Yeah, and you can't hear that. But if I do it more,
if you do it more vigorously,
maybe it'll work. But maybe that's another thing as well. You get different angles to get the ball in the net. But he's a decent player. You just can't. Not every player can score 25 goals a season. Not every player. Like if his return this season is like 8 goals and 7 assists, that's quite good. It's expensive for it.
Seems like it might be though. I mean, also, John, it's not just what a player does on the ball, right? Like Ten Hag clearly wants to play in a certain way and seemingly believes that Anthony offers something to that the players already at Manchester United don't. What do you think that would be if it's not just cutting inside and shooting with the left foot?
Yeah, I mean, one of the biggest impacts I think Erik Ten Hag has had has being able to implement a form of pressing, which has improved them in games where they might not usually have as much control. So now Manchester United are much better at pressing in the final third. It means against teams who maybe would cause them a lot of problems if they ended up just being forced further and further back, they're able to stop that. And Anthony is really important to their forward press. So Anthony is very good at in those situations that I like to describe as like hybrid pressing, when you've got a player who's going to go man for man on different players in different scenarios. So if the ball's on one side of the field, he'll be responsible for one player. If the ball's on the other side, he is responsible for the other. And he has to almost sit between those 2 players and read which player to go to in any given moment. Yeah. Manchester United don't have anyone else who can read the play quite so well at this point.
Well, it's a job that isn't entrusted to any other player currently.
Sure, I think they could use like Alanga is fairly good, but the thing with Anthony is that he's worked with Erik Ten Hag for a number of seasons now, right? So you're not only going to bring in a player who you know what their upside is going to be in possession, but he is also a player who understands those sorts of hybrid systems so that Ten Hag can bring him in. He was excellent, for example, in both the Spurs and Chelsea games, which a lot of people saw as being a really big turning point for the Erik Ten Hag system as well. So I think that, he's probably one of the best wingers in terms of out of possession stuff in the league as well. People aren't going to focus on that as much because people don't focus on the out of possession stuff as much. But I think that's been a really important aspect to the way that they play.
It's good to hear that though, because whilst I don't seek to only defend Anthony, I don't really care about that. What I do care about is when all of a sudden it seems like everyone is allowed to just go, oh, we can only shoot with one foot and therefore he's which just seems like too easy a hit for me to want to allow people
We
to
said
get
it
away
early.
with.
We said it early.
Yeah, now we've moved on to a new thing.
I think it's worth saying as well that wing dynamics are an important aspect of what wingers can do. And we've talked a lot about how Diogo Dalot is playing a fairly... I said Dalot and you're going to be like, it's Dalot, isn't it? Yes,
I didn't
Dalot.
say anything.
You looked at me, though, with those judgmental eyes.
I live inside your
Diogo
head.
Dalot has been playing a really interesting role in that team. He likes to invert. He likes to attack very centrally. There's almost times where he looks like he's playing a 10 position. And I think that is a downside to Anthony's game because I think, as JJ said, if you get him 1v1 isolated against fullbacks, he doesn't look as dangerous as he could do. But as soon as you start getting players around him, it then becomes a lot easier for him to get in, to hit the bylines behind, etc., etc. And so I think that there's definitely something going on with the players around him at the moment. They're not getting those players around him, and they're not seeing that upside from him.
Remember when they signed Sancho for loads of money and he just doesn't get in the team.
I remember that, yeah. I do remember that.
He's meant to be in that position, isn't he? But
I'm curious to see what happens with that over the next sort of year or two. You know, I feel like that is with the team doing well, with lots of the players doing well, with Rashford's red hot form at the moment. Casemiro, as you mentioned, what are you saying? Because I said red hot.
Yeah, we didn't say it in your Joe Devine voice. You did it like a normal bit.
Do you know what? It'd
be like if I said it's an eye-watering amount they paid for Jadon Sancho, isn't it?
It's being in front of this big podcast microphone in a podcast studio makes me go, with their red hot form at the moment. It's interesting to see what will happen with the Jadon Sancho story over the next year. Now, listen, let's read now Steve's one of Steve's.
No, he's got the Hadji right answer.
The Hadji right answer. Yeah, that was only 10 minutes, wasn't it? How long?
Yeah, about that. Mm-hmm. You know, it's a slow computer and really heavy keys on my laptop typing.
Well, listen, you might even need to remind people what we were talking about, how long ago it was. So, do you want to do that now?
Yeah. So the question was, Hadji Wright, was he the American who scored the unusual goal for the USA against the Netherlands in the World Cup? Yes.
Do you know what's
there we go.
a funny thing is calling a laptop a computer?
Yeah, I do that.
Because a computer is like a...
Well, no, that's a desktop.
No, like a computer is like a thing you get in a room that you go into.
No,
the computer.
It's either on the desktop or it's on the laptop.
Yeah.
Do you know what I like? I like when people refer to computers as supercomputers.
Yeah, I like that too.
Like Opta, is it Opta or is it 538? One of the big predictive, and they're like, supercomputer thinks this. Like, it's just a computer, isn't it?
You're my
normal
supercomputer.
Shall I do...
And you're always glitching.
Speaking of supercomputers, for the next answer you ask me, shall I get ChatGPT to write my answer?
Yeah, that's a good idea. Let's try that. Now listen, here's Steve's segue. I'll read it just as it's written. From one team who might be getting a striker, that would have worked if we hadn't talked about the Hadji Wright thing.
He's a striker, to be fair.
Hadji Wright is a striker, and the USA might be getting him. From one team who might be getting a striker, again, it doesn't work, to another who might be better without the best striker in the world, ellipsis. But also Chelsea before that, ellipsis. I have confused myself. That's what Steve said.
Final ellipsis.
Before all of that, ellipsis. A break, ellipsis. That's this quality work right there.
Wow.
Yeah, it's returning from a break now. It was a lovely break, wasn't it? Chelsea, a 10th, JJ. Some would call that a surprise.
Yes, well, I think they need to break it first.
Right, before they can fix it.
And they're doing quite a good job of it, so maybe that was the thing.
It does seem like that terrible form, been knocked out of both domestic cups by Manchester City. Of course, Chelsea just lost 2 games in a row in 3 days to Manchester City, one of the Premier League. Oh no, was it one of the League Cup and then one of the FA Cup?
It was in the Premier League and then the FA Cup in close succession.
Yeah.
And there's a real thing with Graham Potter. So when you take over as a manager at a new club, I don't think it matters who you are. I think and this sounds so stupid, but you have to win the first few games.
Right.
So otherwise, people are just like, huh?
You've got to take people with
this
you.
is worse than it was before. I don't like this. And it's just, I mean...
It's funny when you say that. I often think, like, in many ways, the worst thing about football is the fans.
Oh, yeah.
And I know that's not what you're supposed to say. You're supposed to say, as everyone says, because also it's the best thing. And that's true, right? It only exists because of. Its purpose is only to serve. I appreciate all of that. But when you look at it from the perspective that we do on a day-to-day basis, it does seem that large groups of people make rash decisions together that maybe don't deserve to be considered.
But I think also it's like the players will then, like, it's their employer and the new manager comes in, so they'll be thinking, well, we'll see what this guy's about. Imagine you died, right?
Yeah.
and then we
Imagine
broke all
every
your
day.
bones, and then I
Before or after?
like during this podcast, I'm going to break all your bones right now.
Before
right?
I die.
Yeah.
Oh, Christ.
Is that why he dies?
Is that why?
I've just had a weird couple of weeks, right?
Yeah.
So then, right? So you're boneless, and you can't run Tifo anymore. So then I'll be like, so JJ steps up. Here I come, right?
Wait, I haven't got any
You're not
bones.
here anymore. You're gone.
I'm dead.
You're gone. You're in the shadow
So
realm.
you've killed Joe so you can run Tifo.
yeah, exactly.
It's probably not the best form.
No,
to
not so
admit
I can
this.
do it, but it's just like, right?
Yeah.
So then I step up and say, everyone's then looking to me for leadership.
Yeah.
And then if I make a couple of stupid errors, which is likely,
Yeah. It's very likely.
right? Then they'd be like, I don't know, this guy should be the one in charge, even though everything else to do is actually really smart.
Well, exactly. And in that situation, heightened situation, the crowd of people around there, because they would gather together
Yeah.
and they'd start to they'd
be quiet
they'd make
murmurings.
reasonable points. They'd be like, well, he's a friend of ours and we should give him some time. And then you'd hear a voice from the back going, let's stab him in the heart. And someone goes, everyone's voice is welcome here.
Yeah.
And anyway, my point is more just that if 30,000 people think something emotionally, is that
Well, I think we talked about this in the podcast before, and I think it's important in like Chelsea. There's a certain thing you associate with certain clubs, and Chelsea are with superstars, with all money, and like the drama that comes along with it. And Tuchel, I think probably some of the stuff he did, like you think of him on the touchline, he was like Tasmanian devil a lot, just spinning around and sending people flying into the air.
yeah,
right. That's what
just like Taz.
That's what he did, like Taz.
Yeah.
And that's another good reference for the kids. And so, so there's something about that, right? And the fans often want to see themselves in the manager on the sidelines because they want to be in charge and see what's all going on. And Tuchel was this crazy, dramatic kind of figure on the touchline that would overact things and make it look nuts. I think a lot of it's probably performative on purpose because it helps deal with the psychology of how you manage this group of superstars. So they see that this guy looks mad, but he's not. He's totally in control of everything he's doing, but it seems mad, and you've got to listen to this guy because, oh my God, we've won games, and this guy knows what he's talking about. And even though he's asking us to do crazy, loads of work and training, or these things I don't really understand, I'll go with it.
Yeah.
Whereas Potter seems very reserved, methodical, and almost like he's been given a good chance to go up to Chelsea, and it's a little bit different. He's not brought in this superstar rolling a Ferrari and say, let's roll, boys. Like he's walked in and gone, oh, it's nice to meet you.
Yeah, he's not smoking a cigar.
Exactly,
and
yeah.
holding a grenade.
Exactly, yeah. So I think that's probably relevant because the players will all know who he is and respect him as a professional because that's what they'll do.
Yeah.
But there'll be a certain difference of profile that he has to Tuchel. Now, it's not to say that they don't have the same ability of being coaches, but a lot of what a manager is the psychology of it. And whereas Potter has studied psychology, I think human behaviour is one of the things he's graduated with, isn't it? His master's.
He did a master's and focused on that, yeah.
So he'll know how to do that, but then that's all very well learning the theory, but applying it to these super millionaires, like to get to the level that those Chelsea players are at, you've got to be you've got to have a certain kind of mind, and that's very hard to control, even if you know how to. And I think Tuchel just had that natural aura about him. Maybe it was a thing. Yeah. And we're seeing it with Chelsea now. Is like, how do you rev up players to get going if you're still tweaking things? The same like we're talking about Southampton. It's hard to get that going. Really.
I think so much does come down to results, though, right? If Thomas Tuchel hadn't won that Champions League final, I don't think he'd have lasted as long as he did, because that trajectory that we're still seeing Chelsea on right now was happening. Certainly the beginning of this season, right? And there was always that sense that Thomas Tuchel came in, he made Chelsea defensively sound, and he was going to make them better going forward. And it never really happened.
I thought it seemed as well when Tuchel was there, because you look back at him a bit it's almost romantic to look back on what he did because he won Champions League, and so you think it was amazing. But I remember thinking early on, like the players will get so tired of this constant energy and that sort of thing. I can't see how that would last longer than a year and a half, 2 at the moment.
So much of it does come down to results, though, and I think that's why you're correct, Joe. And it's interesting with the Chelsea fans because it's not only that like fans expect results. It's that Chelsea fans since 2003, when Roman Abramovich came in, have been conditioned to think in a certain way about what like successful performance from a team looks like, right? And that is, we can solve problems through bringing in elite managers on really eventually short contracts, because they bring in a manager to manage all of these really expensive assets that they have, and if it doesn't work, then they just bring someone else in. And now they've just flipped a switch. They've got new owners in, and those owners have said, we're going to try and do things sustainably. And
we're going to hire a process coach.
Yeah, and it seems to me that a lot of the Chelsea fans just simply cannot have the patience for that sort of approach to work.
Sure.
And so they're in this situation as a club.
Perhaps they can have the patience, they're just not used to it.
Yeah, perhaps. A lot of what I see on Twitter is people being like, we're not seeing any changes right now, so therefore the whole process is valid. We should at least be seeing some change now.
But the patience as well, that surely runs out really quickly when you get to the point, like, you can be patient with it if you're going to probably finish around fourth.
Sure.
When you start to really drop out and then you're worried that your Champions League place and the money that brings and the prestige.
10 points away from fourth right now.
It's only 10 points, right? So it's still more than half a season to go. There's an extra game.
And they've not had a window under Potter, despite the fact that it did seem as though some of the players they brought in the summer were because they wanted to bring Potter in, right? But
well, we should contextualise this conversation as well. We can talk more about Potter if we want to, but we should talk about Chelsea's injury list right now. Because N'Golo Kante, Reece James, Wesley Fofana, Ben Chilwell, Armando Broja, Ruben Loftus-Cheek, Raheem Sterling, Christian Pulisic, Edouard Mendy and Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang are all injured right now, which is a lot of players and a lot of first-team players there, which is one of the reasons why in the 2 games against Manchester City recently, we've seen Graham Potter experiment with some of Chelsea's youth players. Speaking of a kind of identity and clash of identity with what the new ownership and Graham Potter are doing now versus what came before, it's a sort of odd experience, quite novel, to even watch a Chelsea team, particularly in a big game, playing youth players or playing players whose names I don't know.
Yeah, and again, you're in this sort of weird zone where Chelsea have brought in, they've got a horribly clunky squad. They've got a lot of players who are sort of throwbacks to that era where they would just spend money and sort of hope it...
To the clunk era?
Yeah, I think so. And then even some of the transfers that they brought in the summer, like Raheem Sterling, I think has just been one of the worst, badly conceived transfers of the summer window for an elite side, really.
I think so.
Because there's just not that joined up thinking. So you're in a situation where you come into a squad which is sort of has all of these vestigial remainders of like times past when they were just bringing in players and hoping managers would sort out the problems as they went. And then they're in this situation now where they want this process manager to have an immediate impact.
Yeah.
And turn things around. And I on the one hand, I have sympathy for Chelsea fans because the big gamble here is using a process coach at that kind of club, right?
Yeah.
I have no doubt that if you put Graham Potter in almost any club in the Premier League and gave him 3 seasons, that club would be in a better situation after 3 seasons than when he arrived. But you can't just do that with elite sides necessarily. It's never quite so simple as that because there is that, I think, a more greater need for immediate
There's the requirement to finish minimum fourth.
For me, this is all down to like how brave is Todd Boehly going to be, right?
It's quite interesting though, isn't it, when you put it that way? Because what elite clubs in the Premier League do is they maintain a wage bill and a payment structure that requires them to finish in the top 4.
Yeah.
And if they don't for a couple of seasons, it starts to have a really negative impact.
Yeah.
But that kind of prevents them from ever really having these massive reshuffles and resets. Like the requirement for a new manager for a top 4 team is just completely different to any other team.
This is what Man United are trying to do right now, right?
Yeah.
They've tried to restructure their wage bill and they were trying to persuade David De Gea to take like 150,000 a week wage reduction to fit into this payment structure. But yeah, it's really tough to, I think, manage a process system when you are coming out of a system where they were, whatever it was it $1 million every week or so that they were just writing off as losses at Chelsea? It was a lot of money.
It was a lot of money. I can't remember how much.
It was being written off every week. And it's going to be tough to move from those things as well. The other thing that I find fascinating about this is that Graham Potter was really good when he came in terms of results, right? So they had the draw against RB Salzburg, which was his opening game.
Yes.
Then they beat Crystal Palace 2-1. They beat AC Milan 3-0. They beat Wolves 3-0. They beat AC Milan 2-0. They beat Aston Villa 2-0. Then they had a couple of draws, one against Brentford, one against Manchester United. They beat Salzburg. The first loss under Graham Potter was that loss against Brighton. And it felt like immediately at that point, they were like, the fans were like, this isn't good enough.
Well, also, I mean, this is kind of around the point where the injury crisis begins. I mean, is it possible that we're having a huge conversation when actually that bit in the middle where they've got like 11 significant players injured is actually the main thing?
And I think it is important. I just think that owners of elite clubs are under so much pressure that you can move a manager on after like I mean, it's obviously been a poor run since then, but it feels like it was very like I don't know. It was just a steep drop off at that. At that point.
Well, there we go. Do you know what else is a steep drop off, John? people's belief that Manchester City are better with Erling Haaland. Let's talk about this. Of course, there was some interesting conversation about this over the weekend and last week. Here's a tweet from Ollie Was Right. I don't know who this is. Ollie Was Right. Do you know who this is, John?
No idea.
Right? No, anyway, it's a tweet from
Ollie was not right.
Ollie was right. It was a tweet with some interesting engagement. Haaland is the best striker in the league, but City are better without him. Today, they reverted to their normal levels of composure and chance creation for multiple players. When Haaland plays, they just try to feed him while ignoring other options. Now, I'd love it if someone would just feed me. That's all I'm thinking. Can someone feed me? Can you explain to me why? I just don't think it's true.
I want to look a lot into it. Look at what different numbers will show, whether there's a different share of goals or chances for their players. But like part of the problem they had before is that the 4-4-2 kind of shape that Guardiola worked on is a 4-2-4. It's actually a 3-2-5. Like it's always just changes whatever. But it had no single striker, so the system worked because they had no actual striker there. They pressed really well. They used Gabriel Jesus sometimes off of the left as a pressing forward, sometimes the right as well. And then you'd play you play Kevin De Bruyne through the middle with someone like Foden, and all players rotate positions. It's very confusing to play against. The structure looks out of possession like a 4-4-2, but it does loads of different things in possession. And they would create those same sort of chances where you try and get the ball into wide areas and you put them across the box into the penalty area, and that's where you score from the penalty area. But against big teams, or against teams who are really good at defending, and just to have a load of momentum behind them, they can block them down, they can stop them creating those chances, they know what they're trying to do, so they can kind of stop it. And then people were saying, well, they need a big striker because that's the difference. If you give a penalty box poacher, you'll get someone who can score the goals that then get you to the next level. And I think we saw it in the Champions League a lot in different seasons where if they just had a player like Haaland in the past, just trying to feed him, they probably would have won these games putting the counter and stuff like that, rather than having to try and intricately pass their way through the entire pitch to get up the pitch to then create a chance that someone's not there to score. But you saw like against Chelsea in the FA Cup, they won 4-0, sure enough. There was a chance early on where I think Cole Palmer, who's playing on the left side, was he? Or maybe the right? He was on the left side anyway, but he shot the ball into the near post side netting, and he had Foden just waiting for a tap-in. That if he'd played the pass to Foden was probably in the position that Haaland would have been in, and it would be the same sort of goal. It's just that Haaland's always in that right position. And I want to know whether they've scored more goals this season than they had last, or there'll be something that we can look into eventually and try and find out what it is. I'll do it in a video IRL or something like that, or maybe John will, and then we can figure out what the difference is. But like they're not worse with Haaland in the team, I don't think.
No,
they just have a different threat, but they can play differently with them in there. I don't think they could play exactly the same way with him in, but that's the whole point of different footballers. They do different things on the pitch. So
yeah, if you look at the underlying numbers, Manchester City are putting up better numbers this season. They have a player who's going to absolutely smash the Premier League goal scoring record if he stays fit. I don't think you can say off the back of that Manchester City are worse with Haaland in the team. I think that's just a nuts argument to make. But this is the level of football that we've reached now. There's such fine margins that the difference between Arsenal and Man City are a better side than Arsenal. I'm happy to say that. I don't think anyone but Arsenal fans are going to get particularly mad.
There's enough of them.
I'm sure. Yeah, there are a lot of them.
Yeah. You're breaking the podcast. Start down again.
Yeah, I won't be on next week. Manchester City are a very good side, but very good sides can dominate games and not win. Manchester City drew with Everton. Everton had one shot from distance in the whole game. Manchester City put up about pushing 3, if not more than 3 XG.
Yeah.
And they ended up drawing that. Yeah, they ended up drawing that game. And
you think they've just been a bit unlucky across the course of the season?
Yeah, if you compare the results of Arsenal and Manchester City, I would say the differences between them are that Arsenal have had the runs of luck when they've needed them, and Manchester City haven't.
The runs of luck. I get those often after I have a curry of despair. Is that okay?
I don't want it, but you've done it now.
Go on, carry on.
So yeah, we're at that sort of level where the very finest margins are determining who's getting the results. I think the interesting question is like, how do City play differently when they have Haaland and when they don't? And I think there is an argument to be made. And again, this is just gut. I've not looked at anything on this, but I think there's an argument to be made that before Haaland arrived at Manchester City, Pep Guardiola is almost the most defensive manager in the Premier League because he's all about control, right? He would rather maintain possession in the final third. Yes, he wants to generate goal-scoring chances, but if that goal-scoring chance doesn't match up to them keeping the ball and they end up turning the ball over and being countered on, he's not going to want to do that. Yeah. Whereas I think when you have just the goated finisher ever in Haaland in the box, you can be a little bit less risk averse.
Are you saying he's the greatest of all time ever?
Yes.
Wow, that is
in terms of finishing. If you look at his numbers,
of all time and ever.
Yeah, both.
It's just incredible, isn't it?
I've really covered all of the options.
Yeah. Okay.
Anyway, getting back to my serious point that I was making. I think when you have a player of that sort of ability in the box, probably better to be a little bit less risk averse and just try and find him because
he's going to score.
Probably going to score.
Different options. The other thing as well is that people like on that tweet. Maybe this guy's right as well with the idea that they're just trying to feed him the whole time. But it's the first season he spent with him, and they'll have been looking like. When you're trying to hammer something into someone, you do it again and again and again and again. You do it in the games as well. Keep trying to feed Haaland.
If my teammate...
Give him meat.
Feed the goat and he will
was
score.
Eating so much that he was en route to absolutely obliterate the Premier League's one season goal scoring record, I'd keep feeding him as much as possible.
Right.
It just happens, right?
And he's scoring goals. He's in the right position and he finishes really well. So that's why his numbers are massive. It's not because they're only trying to score that only one kind of goal.
Sure.
Just that he's then scoring goals, which means they can change the way they play after it.
Yeah.
Which is
They're also
useful.
the most flexible team ever. They played Chelsea in the last two games. In the first game, they Guardiola got things wrong, expected them to come out with a back five and had this weird system where he had, rather than an inverting fullback, he was sort of pushing Rodri between a centre-back position and a centre-midfield position. That didn't work, so they switched it at half-time, went to a more classic sort of inverting fullback system where the right-back was inverting inside. The next game, they came out with a left-back who inverted, didn't like that, and so went to a classic sort of back four, flat four. So they went 4-2-4. That's all in the space of 180 minutes. So I find it funny when people are like, City are worse with Haaland, as though it's just one size fits all with City. It's either they're playing with City or it's not. Last night they played without Gundogan, for example. They played Foden in a more central position. They had Cole Palmer on the left. They had Sergio Gomez. Is that his name?
Yeah.
Sergio Gomez.
Yeah.
As a left back, and they haven't played him much. It was the whole setup was completely different. So you can argue that City look better in a 4-2-4 structure if you want, but they use so many different structures all the time. They use so many different personnel in each of those structures that it's not quite so simple as being like, what are the games where Haaland didn't play versus the ones where he did play? There's a lot more going on than just that.
Take that, Twitter, you pieces of Ollie was wrong.
There's one more interesting bit in Man City, and Guardiola was asked how come Foden doesn't start every single game or something like that. Not that exact
question. How come Foden doesn't start every single game?
Right, and all the players that matters. So he talked about how, and this is another thing you think about, Guardiola, it says some games you focus on the tactics, some games it doesn't matter at all. I think it's interesting because it doesn't. It's about how your players are ready to play, who's ready to do different things in different situations, who's feeling happy that week, who's had a good week in training, all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
He's got to manage a locker room, he called it, a squad basically, of all these amazing players who could start for any team in the world almost, and give them all enough games, keep them fresh, keep them rotated so they're ready to come in, but also hungry to play and play them in their right form.
And feed them.
Yes, I know you want them to be hungry and to be fed, yes. So then you've got Mahrez comes in. So at the start of the season, Guardiola said that Mahrez didn't look to be his best. He wasn't loving football as much as he should have done, didn't have that desire, and wasn't in his best physical shape. And now you see Mahrez has basically won that game. They won 4-0 on the weekend. I mean, the first goal was free kick. It was unbelievable. It was amazing. The way the technique for that is unbelievable. But Mahrez can do that. He's a brilliant, probably the best. I think he's one of the best forwards you'll get in Europe just now. But you don't think it because he didn't play every single game. He started loads of games on the bench last season, even.
Yeah.
But still got loads of numbers. And so you play Foden 3 games a season. You're much less than the risk that he gets injured and is out for months and doesn't continue his development. And I think confidence and momentum are two of the most important things for players. You see, Jadon Sancho now was riding up at Borussia Dortmund, really good, goes to Man United and just has that bit of a fall. And now they've sent him on training camps to try and get him to get his confidence back and just be more of the person he was. But it's very hard to find that back again. So where does he go to get that to a lower level? So that's your career stagnating and not going the way you wanted to.
Well, indeed. I mean, it's an exercise in harmony, really, isn't it? There we go. Fascinating stuff. Now, Steve Hankey did remove this from the plan due to timing issues, but I'm going to mention it anyway because I think it's interesting. Roberto Martinez, John, sort of falling up to Portugal there. He's been announced as the new Portugal manager, leaving the Belgium job after quite some time.
Yeah, this is an interesting one, isn't it? Because he hardly impressed at Belgium. But I wonder whether or not we've now got to a point where most coaches, professional coaches, want to be in the domestic game. So the dynamic has changed between the club job, the country jobs being the really sought after employable options, to a lot of coaches wanting to be working full time, not just having these sort of patchy schedules for their job. And also, I think that's where people now, they're going to make a name for themselves in their career at the domestic level. So maybe it's harder to employ people as international coaches, and that's why.
Do you think it's a bit like being a kind of foreign dignitary or diplomat to a country that has a very ordinary and secure relationship with your home country, and where your job is kind of just to attend events and stuff? There's not really much going on. Whereas some of your friends might want to be at the coalface of politics, but you're pretty happy just sort of going to wine tea
parties.
Yeah,
I think there's probably something in that as well. And I guess with Martinez, he's Spanish, right? So he'll be able to communicate probably with the Portuguese players to a degree.
He's also, is it fair to say, an improvement on prior coach?
Tomato. I don't know.
Of course, in Spanish they say tomato, and in Portuguese they say tomato.
Let's call the whole thing off.
Well, indeed. Why don't we do that? Now, listen, that is the end, I think, of today's Tifo football podcast. What a joy it's been, a return for the new year. JJ Bull, thanking you.
Yes.
And, of course, thanks to Jon Mackenzie. We look forward to welcoming back Herr Stafford Bloor after his break next week. I think he's back next week.
You've broken him as well, have you?
Have I broken him? Yeah, that's correct. I have, yes. And he's in the hospital. But he'll be returning all patched up and wrapped up
Stronger.
in...
To be clear, Seb is not in the hospital.
No, he might be. We don't know. We just don't know.
He's fine.
I'm sure he's fine. Yeah. Anyway, see you later. Back next week with more. Ta-ra.